Challenging Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court hears arguments against abortion. Pro-lifers show their support. Our partners at Pro-Life Weekly provide team coverage. Coronavirus crisis. What we're learning about vaccine mandates. And Christmas controversy. The European Union faces criticism for trying to avoid the word. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, December 1st, 2021. Abortion takes center stage at the U.S. Supreme Court as justices hear oral arguments in a landmark case. Tonight, we have comprehensive coverage. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. The case at the High Court involved a Mississippi case restricting abortion after 15 weeks. Pro-lifers are praying the justices will use it to overturn Roe versus Wade. And both Right to Life and abortion advocates made their feelings known on the court steps. Our Eric Rosales starts our coverage from outside of the court. Eric?
Well, Tracy, it's all quiet now on the steps of the nation's highest court, but it was a much different story earlier today when hundreds came out, some actually holding signs, others with bullhorns, all to make their views known. Today meant so much to the Lewis family that they traveled from Fredericksburg, Virginia, praying the rosary and petitioning Our Lady for help.
Asking the Blessed Mother, to watch over all of these people and unborn babies and babies that have been born, and just keeping her in all of this.
Hundreds of pro-lifers were there to support the unborn.
Not all African Americans are pro-abortion. To demonstrate the inequity of the abortion industry in the African American and Hispanic communities, and to demonstrate that those of us who were fooled by abortion in years past can have our hearts changed.
What I hope today to be a witness is that women truly can embrace life and be a leader and be a happy and fulfilled woman.
Pro-abortion advocates were also vocal.
The only way I'm able to live out my religious freedom in this country is if we're all afforded the opportunity to make our own moral and health and faith-informed decisions for our own bodies.
A decision upholding Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban would implicitly reverse nearly 50 years of precedent and open the door to state restrictions much earlier in pregnancy. Pro-lifers tell me circumstances have changed over the last 50 years.
The science and the medicine has changed. And when you look at the line that they did draw in the sand for viability, when Roe was decided, viability was pegged at 24 to 28 weeks. Today, babies are born at 21 weeks.
Pro-lifers tell me the future of the movement is strong.
Pro-Life America looks like, in our assessment and in all of our planning, means being as ambitious as you can for life in the law, and as being as ambitious as we can possibly be for women and children who are facing crisis pregnancy.
And now that the justices have heard oral arguments, they will plan to make their decision either June or July. To recall, that's right in the middle of the 2022 midterm elections. Outside the U.S. Supreme Court, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And as Eric just mentioned, everyone is watching the Supreme Court for this case. Catherine Hadro, host and managing editor of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, was outside of the court earlier today.
Tracy, there is a lot of energy here outside the Supreme Court. The street in front of the Supreme Court, the steps, they are filled with people. Security has closed off streets nearby for safety purposes, and they've done something unique. They have separated the pro-abortion side from the pro-life side here to maintain a sense of peace, and it has been relatively calm. I've spoken with a variety of pro-lifers here already, from lawmakers to students, and there's a great sense of hope and optimism on behalf of the court and their ruling on the Mississippi law. Pro-lifers here mostly are wearing blue with the message to stand for life, because that empowers women. We'll have much more tomorrow night on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly.
And we are looking forward to that. Well, among the many keen observers at the Supreme Court March for Life, the organization's president, Jeanne Mancini, issued a statement saying, quote, "We are encouraged by today's oral arguments in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. After nearly 50 years, most Americans want to be freed from the deadly oppression of Roe's chaotic rule." And joining me now is Amy Howe, co-founder of SCOTUSblog. Amy, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So first off, I'd like to get your take on the oral arguments. What did you think and what struck you the most?
It was an interesting argument that the justices are back in the courtroom for the first time this term after a full term because of COVID, but the public's not there. So it's got a very different atmosphere. So it's obviously a highly charged issue, but it didn't have the sort of sense of this really momentous argument in the sense that there wasn't a fully packed courtroom.
Right.
It's the justices, their law clerks, and a small handful of reporters who are socially distanced. And the justices have also extended the time for oral arguments. They've sort of switched up the format. So you don't have the sense that the justices are really trying to pack in the questions and are constantly interrupting each other the way that they used to and the way that they might have been if this argument had been 2 years ago, for example.
Anything that either side said that maybe really struck you, that maybe you weren't expecting?
Justice Brett Kavanaugh really came out pretty strongly. Seems to be a vote to overrule Roe versus Wade. He said that the Constitution really doesn't address abortion. It's neutral on abortion, and perhaps we should go back to getting the courts out of abortion and letting it go back to the states and letting the people address it. That was the one thing that really sort of stuck out. So it seems like Justice Thomas, Justice Samuel Alito, and Justice Kavanaugh are votes to overrule Roe versus Wade. The three liberal justices, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Justice Kagan, are votes to affirm Roe and Casey. And then it's really going to be up to the other three conservative justices, Chief Justice John Roberts, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett.
And for those who maybe aren't all that familiar, and we've been talking about it, we've been covering this, but for those who maybe at the heart of it don't understand this case, can you talk briefly about that? And also, we've been hearing about the debate about, the right to abortion and also the viability standard.
Sure. So the Supreme Court said in Roe and Casey that there's a constitutional right to an abortion up to the point at which the fetus becomes viable. And they say the idea is that states can't ban abortions up to the point of viability. They can impose restrictions as long as those restrictions don't place an undue burden on a woman's right to obtain an abortion. And so the state of Mississippi in this case has urged the court to overrule Roe and Casey, which would allow this 15-week ban to stand. But they've said if you don't go all of the way and overrule Roe and Casey, at the very least, you could take viability out of the equation, just look at whether or not a law imposes an undue burden. And they say in this case, the 15-week burden should still stand because it doesn't impose an undue burden, because the clinic in this case is the only clinic in Mississippi that performs abortions. It only performs abortions up to 16 weeks of pregnancy. And so eliminating that extra week, the state says, doesn't impose an undue burden.
Amy, I'm wondering, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but in those oral arguments, was there anything that maybe the Solicitor General said or the other side said that struck out to you? And how do you ultimately think this is going to shape out? I mean, you were there. Did you get a sense of how the justices may rule?
So the liberal justices that really were making the case that overruling Roe and Casey would be seen as a political act, that the Mississippi law had been introduced because of a change in the court's membership, that overruling them at this point would really undermine the court's legitimacy. I really didn't see two more votes to uphold Roe and Casey, or at the very least to strike down the law. I think the question is whether or not the court takes the step and overrules Roe and Casey, or takes the step where the Chief Justice John Roberts seems to be leaning to perhaps uphold the law, but not formally overrule Roe and Casey. We'll know probably in a likelihood in June.
Okay, I was just going to ask my next question was going to be, when do you think we'll get a ruling on this?
Yeah, so the justices will vote on the case this week in all likelihood. They'll start writing opinions, but I imagine this is a case in which the justices are likely to be divided. There's likely to be multiple opinions, and it could be June, maybe even the end of June, before we see a decision.
Okay, and we know that you will be following this very closely, and we'll be watching you as well. Thank you so much, Amy. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
President Joe Biden says that he still supports Roe versus Wade. He was asked about today's Supreme Court case during a separate event about the country's supply chain problem.
I haven't, I didn't see any of the debate today, the presentation today. And I support Roe v. Wade. I think it's a rational position to take, and I continue to support it.
Now, the president downplayed the country's supply chain problem, saying that his actions have already made the situation better. And he said that he would announce more steps to fight the coronavirus pandemic tomorrow. The first case of the Omicron variant, that is, in the United States was just confirmed in California. In other news this evening, a federal judge has blocked President Biden's coronavirus vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. The ruling says the White House does not have the constitutional authority to go around Congress and issue such a mandate. The case was brought by around a dozen states, including Louisiana. By a 3-vote margin, the lower house of Chile's legislature has defeated a bill that would have legalized abortion up to 14 weeks of pregnancy. Most abortions in Chile already illegal up to 12 weeks. One pro-lifer says a majority of Chileans do not support abortion. The ruling National Party in Honduras has conceded the presidential election to opposition candidate Xiomara Castro.
Quiero decirles que hoy me reuní con Xiomara y toda su familia.
The mayor of Honduras' capital, Nasri Asfiora, says that he has congratulated Castro, whose husband was formerly the president of Honduras. Castro pledges to combat poverty, corruption, and drug trafficking. She has also committed to loosening abortion restrictions. Japan's former prime minister endorses Taiwan's application to join the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership.
TPP の果たす役割は重要です。台湾には
Shinzo Abe tells a policy forum that Taiwan is qualified to participate in the regional group. He also warned China to not threaten Taiwan. In response, Beijing denounces Abe's remarks and reaffirms its sovereignty claims over Taiwan. Beijing and Taipei are vying for TPP membership. Russia sent humanitarian aid to Afghanistan today. 3 cargo planes were filled with basic food items, including flour, sugar, and tea. The planes will return with passengers on board, including Russian citizens. This is the 3rd such mission from Moscow. Another is planned later this month. Coming up, continuing coverage. What else you should know about today's case at the Supreme Court and how it could affect the future of abortion. And growing love. Pope Francis offers advice to couples. Well, the oral arguments in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health presented a variety of issues for the justices to debate. The justices' questions ranged from asking when life begins to why viability would be the most appropriate legal standard. And joining me now is Ryan Anderson, president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Ryan, welcome back. Great to see you. First off, your reaction to the oral arguments today. What stood out to you?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that they went about as well as we could have hoped for. There was not a single question from any of the conservative justices that caused me to have concern that they might be on the wrong side of this issue. There was nothing that the pro-choice lawyers said that I think caused anyone to reconsider this case. The lawyer representing the pro-life side did a great job. So I think one takeaway is that we had a good day in court today. And I think that's a good thing for anyone who cares about justice for the unborn.
Absolutely. And I know you've been following this very closely all along, and you were pretty vocal on Twitter today, particularly mentioning Justice Sotomayor's line of questioning, even one comparing brain-dead individuals to babies in the womb and whether or not they can feel pain. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Sure. I was struck by, I mean, just to be blunt, how poorly constructed Justice Sotomayor's questions were. They just weren't that thoughtful. It was the type of thing that you expect from a freshman, late night, a philosophy BS session. But I think that's a sign of how weak the argument is for the pro-choice side on this. They can't ground it in the Constitution. They can't ground it in good science. They can't ground it in good philosophy. At one point, she asserted that it's only religion that could lead someone to be pro-life. If that's true, that's a really bad sign for secularism. But my viewpoint on this is that it's no more religious nor any less religious than the argument for why we shouldn't allow homicide for adults or for born children. It's the same exact argument that grounds our dignity, our innate value, our worth, whether we're in the womb or outside of the womb. And if that's only defensible on religion, so much the worse for secularists.
Yeah, and another thing I want to mention too, because you were, on Twitter a lot today. We know you also talked about that you were talking to a former Supreme Court clerk who said the pro-abortion arguments were not well received by the justices. Let's touch on that, if you will.
Sure. I mean, I think that we only really heard a lot from two of the left-leaning justices, Justice Breyer and Justice Sotomayor. Justice Kagan was tellingly quiet, which either suggests that she knows that her side is going to be losing this case, or she's going to be trying to lobby the conservative justices, one-on-one, privately, between now and when they conference on Friday. It's important for court watchers to remember that this case won't be formally announced until probably the end of June. They're going to vote on it at the end of this week. Then they're going to start writing their opinions, circulating opinions. And we know from past cases that justices change their votes. They switch sides. It'll be important for us to make clear that nothing short of overturning Roe and overturning Casey is an acceptable outcome in this case.
Yeah, and Ryan, there was something that we heard a lot today. Maybe people weren't familiar with the stare decisis, or the court following its previous rulings, which seemed to be a cornerstone kind of the debate today. Can you talk to us about why that precedent is so important to the court, and why overturning a case of this magnitude could be so significant?
Sure. I mean, stare decisis is an important judicial principle that we don't want the court, year to year, constantly changing what it says the law is, that we want consistency and predictability when it comes to the law. But when the court gets a decision egregiously wrong, it's up to the court to admit it and to correct the record, that our fidelity should be first and foremost to the Constitution, not to a past court ruling, especially when it's wrong about a matter of such important justice and human rights as the right to life. Justice Alito was brilliant on this, and he kept saying, all right, so Plessy v. Ferguson, the case that said that racial segregation was constitutionally acceptable, should the court not have overturned that decision? How long did it have to wait before it admitted a mistake and overturned that decision? Now, if you think racial discrimination was unconstitutional, you think racial discrimination is unjust, and I think both of those things, it's unjust, it's unconstitutional, the court should have gotten it right as soon as possible. It's even worse with abortion.
Yeah.
Right? Abortion is unjust, and we shouldn't have waited this long. Now's the time for the court to finally get it right.
Yeah, right. Not a whole lot of time left, but quickly, your thoughts. How do you think this is going to shape up? And then also, if ultimately Roe versus Wade is overturned, what would happen? What would happen for the state's responsibility in regulating abortions?
So, I mean, a lot could change between now and when they finally announce a decision. But I think just going by today's oral arguments, I think we're in a good spot for a 6-3 ruling overturning Roe and overturning Casey. And it's going to be important for us to make clear that that's the only acceptable outcome here. What that would mean is that it would then return the abortion question to the democratic process. That means in all 50 states, citizens are going to have to be engaged to ensure that their elected representatives pass good laws protecting children, but so too at the federal level. Both Congress and the executive branch, the president, can enact policies that will protect children. And then the last thing I'll say is all of us need to create a culture in which both children and mothers are going to be welcomed, are going to be supported. We can pass laws that will allow more women to choose life, to have paid family leave, to have economic policies that make family formation and the choice to bear a child and to raise a child more feasible. I think if Roe is finally overturned, that's not the end of the pro-life movement. That's the beginning of a new stage for the pro-life movement.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for your time. So much more we can talk about, but unfortunately running out of time. We always appreciate your expertise. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Up next, an attempt to silence Christmas, why the European Union is rethinking its holiday guide. Bishops in the Netherlands have canceled Christmas midnight masses because of COVID-19. In a statement on their website, the church leaders said the decision will prevent large crowds from gathering for the evening services. Midnight masses in the country were also canceled last year. A Vatican official says that he is, quote, ultimately very optimistic about relations between Catholics and Orthodox in Serbia. Archbishop Paul Gallagher made his remark during a visit to the country, which is roughly 85% Orthodox. Archbishop Gallagher also recently visited Russia, which is a majority Orthodox. Well, the European Union has withdrawn a document that recommended against using the phrase Christmas period. The Vatican, who was among those who pushed back against the document. The controversial document was called Union of Equality. It recommended using the phrase holiday period, saying it would, quote, avoid discrimination and promote inclusivity. EWTN Newsroom correspondent Colm Flynn joins us now. Colm, great to see you. Tell us, I understand the document received a lot of pushback, including from the Vatican. What more can you tell us about that?
Good evening, Tracy. Yes, that's right. The European Commission yesterday did a U-turn and retracted an internal communication guideline which had suggested to staff at the European Commission not to use the word Christmas and instead use the word holiday. So, for example, holiday season instead of Christmas season. Now, this was a 32-page internal document called #Union of Equality. It was intended for staff working at the European Commission, which is the executive level of the European Union. So these are people in very high positions in both Brussels and Luxembourg. It was a guide on how they should communicate and the type of language they should and should not use when sending out memos, putting posts on social media, and so on. The document also said to avoid assuming that everyone is Christian, end quote. Under the headline of do's and don'ts, it gave examples of language that it thought could be problematic and suggested alternatives. For example, it suggested that instead of saying, quote, Christmas time can be stressful, one should say holiday times can be stressful. Now, there was a strong reaction to the document, with many claiming it was trying to cancel Christmas and Europe's Christian roots. One of the strongest reactions was from the Vatican's Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. He released a video responding to the guidelines, saying that it went against reality and said that while he applauded the Commission's efforts to eradicate discrimination, this couldn't involve the, quote, cancellation of our roots, the Christian demise of Europe, especially with regard to Christian festivals, end quote. Now, the Cardinal went on to stress that one of the main influences in the establishment of Europe was Christianity, and that could not be ignored.
Colm, I'm curious, did the European Commission, did they issue a response after the Vatican's reaction?
Yes, Tracy. Well, they retracted the document, and the European Commissioner for Equality, Helena Dalli, who was responsible for the document, she said that it was intended to encourage diversity and showcase, quote, inclusive nature of the European Commission. She then admitted, though, that the document had failed to do this. The guidelines clearly need more work, she said. And she said that an updated version would be released in the future. Now, it seems most people following the story saw this as a victory for common sense. But one Dutch MP, Sophie Vel, she said that she was concerned by the Commission's sudden retreat and said that they deserved praise for having the courage to address the issue, be it in a somewhat clumsy way.
Colm, quickly, before I let you go, what else is included in the now retracted document? What do you know about that?
Well, there was quite a bit, Tracy, but some of the ones that stand out. The document suggested that when people were presenting hypothetical examples, officials should not choose names that were typically from one religion. So an example they gave was that instead of using Maria and John, an international couple, the guide recommended saying Malika and Giulio are an international couple. It also said that staff should not assume people were, quote, white and married. It said that it was best to avoid gender-specific words and phrases such as chairman, ladies and gentlemen, and man-made. Tracy?
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Colm. Colm Flynn, EWTN Newsroom correspondent. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Tracy.
And finally tonight, Pope Francis tells couples if they want to know what real love looks like, they should look to St. Joseph.
Prende la vita come viene. Dio intervento lì, la prendo.
At his weekly talk at the Vatican, the Holy Father said Mary and Joseph probably had dreams and expectations when God inserted himself into their lives. Pope Francis says St. Joseph teaches us to take life as it comes and not to be afraid to take risks for the ones we love. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.